The Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Ahmed Attaf, has held talks with his U.S. counterpart, Antony Blinken, during which the two parties reviewed the state and prospects of Algerian-U.S. relations and tackled a number of regional and international issues of common interest. In Sudan, heavy fighting has marred the city of Omdurman as the conflict between the army and the rapid support forces has intensified in the country. And leaders from the West African bloc, ECOWAS, are meeting today in an emergency summit devoted to the coup in Niger after the country's military chiefs defied an ultimatum to restore the elected president. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Mr. Ahmed Attaf, who is on a working visit to Washington on behalf of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmadjid Tebboune, has held talks with his U.S. counterpart, Antony Blinken, during which the two parties reviewed the state and prospects of Algerian-U.S. relations and tackled a number of regional and international issues of common interest, according to a ministry press release. More details on this particular subject with our colleague Saad Boghazi.
On this occasion, the two ministers highly commended the depth and solidity of the historic relations of friendship and cooperation linking Algeria and the United States of America, welcoming the pace of bilateral political consultations and the expansion of economic relations into new areas, as well as the promising prospects for further achievements based on the values of friendship, trust, and understanding. In this respect, Ahmed Attaf and Antony Blinken reaffirmed the strong political will of the leaders of both countries to strengthen the Algerian-American partnership and raise it to the highest levels, the press release added. The two sides also exchanged views on regional developments, particularly the situation in Niger, Mali and Libya, underlining the convergence of the positions of the two countries and their efforts to favor peaceful solutions to these crises in order to avoid the risks of a military option in the region, the press release noted. They also discussed developments in the Palestinian question in view of the continuing deadlock in the political process, as well as the latest developments in the Sahrawi question, reaffirming their support for the efforts of the personal envoy of the United Nations Secretary General, Staffan de Mistura, to enable the two parties to the conflict to adhere without preconditions and in good faith to the political process sponsored by the United Nations. The two ministers welcomed the great convergence of the two countries' positions on the issues raised at bilateral and multilateral levels, expressing their willingness to pursue efforts to explore the promising prospects of the Algerian-American partnership and to intensify relations of consultation and coordination, particularly during Algeria's next term as a non-permanent member of the Security Council.
And the President of the Constitutional Court, Omar Belhaj, is taking part from yesterday, Wednesday, in Jakarta, Indonesia, in the proceedings of the International Conference of Presidents of Constitutional Courts, said a press release from the institution. The conference, organized to mark the 20th anniversary of the Indonesian Constitutional Court, is being held under the theme Strengthening Democracy Through Constitutional Courts, the same source said, adding that the proceedings will continue until August 11. According to the press release, this conference is a good opportunity to examine ways of establishing and strengthening relations of friendship and cooperation with counterpart institutions or constitutional institutions, especially as the constitutional courts and councils of many countries, including Turkey, South Africa, Angola, and Kazakhstan, are taking part in this important event. The President of the Constitutional Court will deliver a speech on the role of the Constitutional Court in strengthening democratic principles, in which he will review the developments of constitutional justice in Algeria and the progress made in enshrining the principles of democratic governance and the rule of law, the same source points out. The Minister of National Solidarity, Family and the Status of Women, Kautar Kerikou, has taken part via video conference in the extraordinary meeting of the Arab Women's Commission to examine the issues on the agenda of the 5th session of the Arab Summit for Economic and Social Development. In her speech at this meeting, organized by the General Secretariat of the Arab League via the digital platform, the minister reviewed Algeria's experience in empowering women and promoting women's entrepreneurship, recalling Algeria's proposal to draw up an Arab plan to encourage women's leadership in the Arab world. Kautar Kriko affirmed that the Algerian government attaches great importance to the political, economic and social advancements of women in view of the efforts made in this area, particularly in rural areas. Law 1807 of June 8, 2018 on the protection of individuals with regard to the processing of personal data comes into force today, according to a press release issued by the National Authority for the Protection of Personal Data. To this end, the authority is informing public and private bodies and individuals at the same time involved in the processing of personal data that it has opened a portal on its electronic site www.anpdp.z, enabling them to create a personal account to access the portal and fill in electronic forms relating to the pre-declaration of processing operations, authorization requests, and consultation requests, with the possibility of monitoring the outcome of their requests. The ANPDP has also posted on the same site a guide explaining how to use the digital portal, as well as its internal regulations, which cover all the procedures relating to the conduct and operation of the authority. The authority therefore invites all those concerned to begin carrying out the necessary procedures to ensure that their data processing complies with the provisions of the aforementioned Act 1807. To the international arena now, leaders from the West African bloc, ECOWAS, are meeting today for an emergency summit on the coup in Niger after the country's military chiefs defied an ultimatum to restore the elected president. 2 weeks after the coup that toppled Mohamed Bazoum, ECOWAS says it is seeking a diplomatic solution but has not ruled out using force to resolve the crisis. Important decisions are expected from the gathering in Nigeria's capital, Abuja, according to a statement from the 15-nation organization. Meanwhile, Niger's coup leaders have formed a new government, according to the country's new strongman, General Abdurrahman Tiani, who read out a statement on national television on Wednesday night. The 21-member government is headed by Prime Minister Ali Mahaman Lamine Zain and includes 20 ministers, including the defense and interior ministers. And still in Africa, residents of Omdurman, the twin city of Sudan's capital, Khartoum, have had to live through massive aerial bombardments and heavy fighting over the past 3 days as the conflict between the army and the rapid support forces intensifies as it approaches its 5th month. News had spread that the bodies were mounting up as the bombs from above, as well as shrapnel and bullets from ground level, were hitting civilians. Saad Bougazi reports again.
It is hard to find individual plots for people as the fighting is blocking access to the main graveyards. So many of those who died were put in a mass grave. A source at the only functioning hospital in Omdurman said that 33 civilians have been killed since Monday, when the conflict seemed to enter a new phase. Some reports say this is the most intense fighting since the beginning of the war in April. The army, which is trying to dislodge the paramilitary rapid support forces from parts of Omdurman, was flying over bombers as well as shelling the city from the ground. They are trying to gain control of a key bridge across the Nile linking Omdurman and Khartoum North that the RSF uses. There are still international attempts to get the two sides to talk, but it does not feel like Army Chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan or the head of the RSF, Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, better known as Hemeti, are ready to negotiate. Without a ceasefire on the horizon, they appear to be blocked in a cycle of offensive and counter-offensive that seems to have no end.
China's Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, Dai Bing, has called on the warring parties in Sudan to cease hostilities as soon as possible. The armed conflict in Sudan has been going on for nearly 4 months now, claiming more and more civilian casualties and worsening the humanitarian situation in the country. As good friend and partner of Sudan, China deeply regrets this development, said Dai Bing. Quoted by the China news agency, China hopes that the parties concerned in the interests of the country and its people will put an end to the fighting as soon as possible, promote de-escalation and resolve their differences through dialogue in order to create conditions for peace and reconciliation, he told the UN Security Council. And in Somalia, at least 6 passengers, including 3 children, have been killed and 12 injured after the minibus in which they were traveling hit an improvised explosive device in the southern region of Lower Shabelle in the south, announced the governor of the region, Mohammed Ibrahim Bari. According to the same source quoted by the SONA news agency, the vehicle had left the town of Marka and was heading towards the town of Corioli when it ran over the explosive device. We believe that the enemy, the Shabab terrorists, are behind this despicable act, said the governor. To the Middle East now, where the Palestinian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates has warned that countries that oppose international sanctions against the Zionist entity are supporters of sabotaging the two-state solution and support violations of international law in Palestine. More in this report by Saeed Boughassi.
Countries that grant the Zionist entity immunity from international sanctions are partners in sabotaging the two-state solution and are encouraging more violations and crimes condemned by international law, said the Palestinian diplomacy in a statement quoted by the Wafa news agency. According to the ministry, the indifference of these states partly justifies the Zionist entity's headlong rush into colonization. In the same context, the Palestinian diplomacy has condemned the Zionist colonization practices in all their forms, noting that the Zionist entity bears full responsibility for the consequences of its practices. On the ground, the Palestinian youth was today shot dead by Zionist gunfire during a military raid in the area of Zawata, west of the occupied West Bank city of Nablus, according to Wafa news agency. Security sources told Wafa that Zionist occupation forces raided the aforementioned area, sparking confrontations with Palestinians, during which a youth identified as Amir Khalifa, 27, was hit with a bullet to the head. Khalifa was transferred to the hospital, where he was pronounced dead later. Elsewhere, 3 Palestinian youths were today injured in the occupied city of Al-Quds following an assault by Zionist settlers in a public park. Local sources said that the 3 youths were taken to a hospital with injuries and bruises, whereas one of them suffered from a head injury after a settler hit him with a sharp object. Occupation forces raided a number of neighborhoods and towns around Al-Quds, sparking confrontations with Palestinians, during which the soldiers fired sound grenades and tear gas bombs intensively towards Palestinians. According to official statistics, at least 213 Palestinians have been shot dead since the beginning of 2023.
And a candidate in Ecuador's forthcoming presidential election who has campaigned against corruption and gangs has been shot dead at a campaign rally. Fernando Villavicencio, a member of the country's National Assembly, was attacked as he left the event in the capital, Quito, on Wednesday. He is one of the few candidates to allege links between organized crime and government officials in Ecuador. A state of emergency has been declared following the assassination. Ecuador has historically been a relatively safe and stable country in Latin America, but a recent rise in violent crime fueled by the growing presence of drug cartels has been a central issue in this year's presidential campaign. And finally, raging wildfires fanned by hurricane winds have devastated the historic town of Lahaina on Hawaii's island of Maui. At least 6 people were killed in Maui country, officials said on Wednesday. Maui's hospital system has been overwhelmed with burn patients and people suffering from smoke inhalation. There were reports early on Wednesday that some people jumped into the ocean to escape the fast-moving flames. The U.S. Coast Guard said it rescued at least 12 people from the water. And with this, we come to the end of this news bulletin for today. Time now for a weekly program, starting with my colleague Asya Bakar and another program by my colleague Jamal Salmani. As for me, I'll meet again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin in English. Thank you for being with us, and bye-bye.
Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to our cultural program. Today we'll talk about a novella written by Mouloud Faraoun, an Algerian writer that was born in 1913 in Tizi Ibil in Tizi Ouzou, Algeria. He became a schoolmaster in Algeria and was assassinated on March 15, 1962, a week before the War of Independence ended. Today's novella is The Poor Man's Son, known in French as Le Fils du Pauvre, that was written in 1954 during the Algerian Liberation War. The Poor Man's Son is largely autobiographical. The main character's name, Foroulou Manrad, is almost an anagram of Mouloud Faraoun. The book opens with a preamble. Manrad is a school teacher in a small village in Kabylia, and he wrote his personal story in a notebook. The first part of the novella is a first-person narrative, with Foroulou telling about his childhood. He recreates his small village, describes the genealogy of his family and their way of life. Like a gifted storyteller, he makes us hear and see life in this remote part of Algeria. He describes the streets and the houses, the family clan and its living together, the bickering and even jealousy between his mother and his aunt. As the only boy, he was cherished by his parents and was always put first. His sisters didn't have the same position in the family, and he had better food and better care, something that he was aware of at a young age, as he tells the reader in this passage, quote, "Since I was the first viable boy born in my family, my grandmother peremptorily decided to call me Foroulou, from to hide. This means that nobody in the whole world could see me until I'd crossed the threshold of our house myself on my own feet." Unquote. That's how important he was to his family. Faraoun depicts a place where almost everybody was poor and always on the verge of being poorer. Any accident or illness preventing the adults to work could lead to starving. Any event affecting the crops could lead to not having enough food to put on the table. All of the adults' energy is spent on staying afloat and feed the family. If needed, men went to France to work for a while and sent fresh money back home. Faraoun weaves a wonderful tribute to his aunts, as he loved spending time in their house. They were artisans creating potteries and baskets with artful drawings. He remembers their craft and their affection. Unfortunately, one of them dies while giving birth, and the other loses her mind from sorrow and disappears forever, leaving young Faraoun deeply touched and deprived of the unconditional love he received from them. Their love was shown not only in their care but also in the stories that related to him, that surely played a major role in widening his imagination to make him become an author himself. With little touches, little anecdotes and memories, this scenery appears to us. We see the dusty streets and the unbearable summer heat. We hear children laughing and running through the village playing together. We see the family. We imagine Furulu in the fields, destined to be a shepherd. Anecdotes about fights, tricks, and illnesses let us see the local traditions. The presence of the French occupier back then is only palpable in some areas like the school system and the police, as the villagers did their best not to involve the French police in their quarrels. Things start to change for Furulu. When he goes to school, it's a sacrifice for the family. They need to buy him supplies and clothes, and while he's in school, he's not working. This was common in poor communities. School isn't seen as vital as working, and Faraon wonders, are family men who spend their time trying to satisfy little bellies able to also take care of little brains? As you can guess from Faraon's biography, going to school will be a turning point in his literary doppelganger's life. Furulu's school teacher in the village made him participate in a competition to win a scholarship to go to the college or junior high. This was common practice in the French school system of the beginning of the 20th century during the French colonization to Algeria. School teachers were on a mission to detect only lucky, bright pupils to help them go further. It was also a way to have candidates to enter the École Normale, the state network of schools that trained future school teachers. That's what Manrad and Faraon did. For the second part of the book, we switch from Furulu's voice to that of an omniscient narrator. This part relates Furulu's years in college and his years after graduation. There is no real plot in The Poor Man's Son. It's mostly a tribute from a grown man to his origins. He recalls his childhood with tenderness and emotion, but doesn't sugarcoat poverty. The Poor Man's Son is a novella that brings history and art together and immerses the reader in the world of a young boy whose destiny was different from that of his surroundings. And despite the sorrow and suffering revealed in the book and the tears that may be shed by the reader, The Poor Man's Son remains worth of the reader's time for the information and the artistic style of the life story of a writer as popular as Mulud Faraon.